In the spring of 1982, Britain decided to fight what it thought would be a quick, easy war. The mission: retake the Falkland Islands, an archipelago in the South Atlantic that Argentina had just invaded. What could possibly go wrong when a global superpower fights a struggling nation with modest military capacity? Turns out, almost everything. Britain lost 7 warships, the pride of its fleet. The conflict didn't end in days. It dragged on for 10 weeks. 255 British servicemen died. 34 aircraft and helicopters were destroyed. And all of this happened 8,000 miles from London, in one of the most remote, wind-swept, frozen places on Earth. A cluster of islands with fewer than 4,000 people, where summer temperatures barely reach 60 degrees Fahrenheit, and winter brings endless rain, constant gales, and darkness. So here's the question that makes no sense. Why would Britain risk billions of dollars and hundreds of lives for a few islands in the middle of nowhere? Why has this desolate archipelago been fought over by France, Spain, Argentina, and Britain for centuries? And here's the real mystery. Why are the people who live on these frozen rocks richer per capita than citizens of mainland Britain itself? Hold on. Before we dive into this research, I need to know something. Where are you joining from, and what time is it there right now? Country, city, local time, put it all in the comments below. I really want to see how global this is. Now, let's get into it. Let's start with the basics. The Falkland Islands, or Malvinas, as Argentina calls them, sit roughly 300 miles off the coast of Argentina and 7,500 miles from London. The archipelago consists of 2 large islands and hundreds of smaller ones. Total land area is roughly the size of Connecticut. The landscape is bleak: treeless tundra, rocky hills, peat bogs, and grass. Endless grass. The weather is brutal. Average summer temperature is around 60 degrees. Winter drops to the mid-30s. Rain falls constantly. Wind blows at gale force most days. The islands have roads in only one town. There are no trees because the wind won't let them grow. The soil is too poor for agriculture. And yet, the GDP per capita here is 96,000 euros as of 2023. Compare that to mainland Britain at 45,000 euros. The people living on these desolate rocks are twice as wealthy as their fellow citizens back home. So how did we get here? The history of the Falklands is a messy tangle of European colonial ambitions. European explorers first spotted the islands in the 1500s. The first documented landing is attributed to English captain John Strong in 1690. He named the channel between the 2 main islands Falkland Sound, after his patron, a nobleman named Falkland. The name stuck. From that point on, the Falklands became the subject of one of the longest and most tangled territorial disputes in history. In the 18th century, France established the first colony. At almost the same time, unaware of the French presence, the British set up their own settlement on a different part of the islands. Then Spain showed up, used a mix of diplomacy and force, and kicked both the French and British out. Spain controlled the islands for nearly 50 years. But in 1811, facing internal problems, Spain abandoned them. That's when Argentina entered the picture. At the time, the nation was called the United Provinces of the Rio de la Plata and had just broken away from Spain. The Falklands were only 300 miles offshore, so Argentina's claim seemed logical. They appointed a governor, settled the islands, and began fishing and seal hunting. Everything seemed fine until the governor got into a dispute with American seal hunters. The United States didn't tolerate this. They sent warships and effectively destroyed the Argentine outposts, so the islands stood abandoned again, except for a small Argentine garrison. In 1833, Britain decided it was time to take the islands for good. They did so without much difficulty. English and Scottish settlers began arriving. The local population raised sheep and engaged in maritime industries. For decades, no one seriously challenged British control. Until 1982. That's when Argentina, under a military junta facing domestic unrest, invaded the Falklands to rally nationalist support. For a brief period, Argentina controlled the islands. Then Britain sent an entire task force, thousands of soldiers, dozens of ships, aircraft carriers. The British underestimated their opponent. Argentina had modern aircraft and anti-ship missiles, hence the shocking losses. But after 10 weeks of fighting, Britain won. The islands returned to British control. Argentina still disputes this. As recently as a few months ago, Argentina's government renewed its claim. Britain ignores it. Now here's where the story gets interesting. Why did anyone care about these islands? The weather is miserable. The land is barren. There are no trees, no arable soil, just rock, grass, and wind. For most of history, the Falklands were economically worthless. The only reason anyone bothered with them was strategic location. They sit near critical shipping routes around Cape Horn, the southern tip of South America. Before the Panama Canal, ships traveling between the Atlantic and Pacific had to go around South America. The Falklands offered a potential refueling and resupply point. But that advantage faded with the opening of the canal and the advent of modern shipping. So what changed? How did these islands go from strategic backwater to economic powerhouse? The answer lies in a single legislative act passed in the wake of the 1982 war. After Britain retook the Falklands, it declared an exclusive economic zone around the islands. This zone covers an area of roughly 180,000 square miles, about 1.5 times the size of Germany. Within this zone, the Falkland Islands government controls fishing rights. And that changed everything. The waters around the Falklands are extraordinarily rich. Cold currents from Antarctica mix with warmer Atlantic waters, creating ideal conditions for marine life. The area teems with squid, which makes up 75% of the total catch. There's also Patagonian toothfish, hake, mackerel, and other valuable species. But here's the key. The Falklands government doesn't do the fishing itself. It sells licenses. Foreign fishing fleets, primarily from Japan, China, South Korea, and Spain, pay millions of dollars annually for the right to fish in Falkland waters. In recent years, fishing license revenue has ranged from 14 to 22 million euros per year. For a population of just over 3,000 people, that's an enormous sum. Fishing now accounts for nearly 60% of the island's GDP. This is where the economic model gets fascinating. The Falklands don't rely on subsidies from Britain. They're financially self-sufficient. The government funds healthcare, education, infrastructure, and pensions entirely from local revenue. Unemployment is below 1%. Crime is almost non-existent. The last murder on the islands was over 30 years ago. The standard of living rivals that of wealthy European nations. And all of this is built on selling access to fish. But there's another twist. In 2010, oil companies discovered potentially massive oil reserves offshore. Estimates suggest up to 60 billion barrels, which would make the Falklands a resource giant on par with major oil-producing nations. So why hasn't this been developed? 2 reasons. First, politics. Drilling for oil right off the coast of Argentina, which still claims the islands, is a geopolitical powder keg. No one wants to reignite the conflict. Second, economics. The Falklands are remote, the weather is brutal, and extraction costs would be enormous. Political risk combined with high operational costs has kept investors away. Some fishing companies won't even work with the Falklands for fear of losing access to Argentine ports. So the oil sits there, a potential fortune locked under the seabed, untouched. Let's go back to the sheep. Remember, sheep outnumber people on the Falklands by about 150 to 1. There are roughly 500,000 sheep on the islands. The British brought them in after taking control in 1833. For the next century, sheep farming was the backbone of the economy. Wool was exported to Britain, and the economy remained agrarian, sparsely populated, and dependent on imports. Nearly all the land was owned by a few large British companies. Until the 1980s, the ownership structure was almost feudal. A handful of big ranches controlled nearly all agricultural production, and locals worked for them. In recent decades, that's changed. Today, there are about 70 individual farming operations. Thanks to clean pastures, suitable climate, and absence of disease, Falkland wool is prized for its purity and quality. Farmers produce roughly 1,500 tons of raw wool annually, which is sold to Britain, Australia, Italy, and other countries. As of 2023, sheep farming accounts for just 3% of GDP. It's no longer the economic driver, but it remains culturally significant. The third pillar of the economy is tourism. The islands offer raw natural beauty, unique wildlife, and a sense of total remoteness. There are 5 species of penguins, elephant seals, albatrosses, and other seabirds. The tourist season runs from November to March, when daylight is longer and temperatures range from 50 to 60 degrees Fahrenheit. Before the COVID pandemic, tourism contributed about 10% of GDP. That figure is still recovering and currently sits around 3 to 4%. Visitors come for wildlife photography, hiking, and the experience of standing at the edge of the world. So what about British subsidies? The Falklands receive almost no financial support from London. They pay for everything themselves. The one exception is defense. Britain maintains a military base at Mount Pleasant, protecting the islands from potential threats, primarily from Argentina. Those costs are paid directly by the British government and don't appear in the Falkland Islands budget. London also represents the islands in international negotiations, including trade and diplomacy. But the Falklands choose their own trading partners and manage their own internal affairs. This level of autonomy is genuinely unusual for a territory of its size. Now here's the paradox. If life on the Falklands is so good, high incomes, excellent healthcare, virtually no crime, stunning natural environment, strong community, why does the population remain stuck at around 3,500 people? The answer is migration policy. The Falklands have one of the strictest immigration systems on the planet. Even British citizens, who theoretically have the right to live there, face significant barriers. The local government fiercely protects the interests of islanders. They tightly control who can reside there to preserve the island's unique culture, economy, and environment. There's a delicate balance at work. The population is just large enough for the economy to function and for everyone to earn well. The islands import most goods from the mainland, and resources are limited. A sudden population influx would strain infrastructure and services. But if you're determined to move there, here's how it works. First, you need a job. If you're a wealthy investor, a skilled engineer, or planning to start a business, you might find a spot. But obtaining a work permit requires navigating layers of bureaucracy. The employer must prove they couldn't find a suitable candidate among locals. The employer must also pay for your and your family's full repatriation costs when your contract ends. You're required to have expensive medical insurance, and you can't stay longer than 4 years on a single permit. After that, you'd need to negotiate a new contract. Only then might you be eligible to apply for permanent residency. There's also the Argentina factor. Argentina still claims the Falklands. If too many British citizens settle there, it could provoke Argentina into more aggressive actions. On the other hand, letting in large numbers of Argentines isn't appealing to locals either. Armed takeovers aren't theoretical, they've happened before. So the solution is to remain small, cohesive, and relatively wealthy. The fragile balance has held so far. In a 2013 referendum, 99.8% of islanders voted to remain a British overseas territory. It's an ideal arrangement for them. They're autonomous, but militarily protected by one of the world's most powerful nations. Here's what this entire story reveals. 3 clear conclusions emerge. First, geographic isolation can be an economic asset if you control the right resources. The Falklands were worthless for most of history. No one wanted them except as a strategic refueling point. But once Britain declared the exclusive economic zone, the islands gained control over an enormously valuable marine resource. The fish didn't change. The water didn't change. What changed was the legal framework that allowed the local government to monetize access. This is a pattern we see repeatedly. Resources only create wealth when institutions exist to manage and sell them. The Falklands have transparent governance, low corruption, and enforceable property rights. That's why fishing licenses generate steady revenue instead of being siphoned off by elites. Many resource-rich countries fail because they lack these institutions. The Falklands succeeded because, despite their remoteness, they inherited British legal and governmental structures. Second, small populations with exclusive access to high-value resources can achieve extraordinary per capita wealth. The Falklands have 3,500 people and control fishing rights over an area the size of Spain. Even modest absolute revenue becomes enormous on a per capita basis. Compare this to resource-rich nations with large populations. Nigeria has oil, but with over 200 million people, per capita wealth remains low. Venezuela has the world's largest proven oil reserves, but suffers from poverty and mismanagement. The Falklands avoid this trap because the population is small and controlled. The strict immigration policy isn't just about culture, it's economic self-preservation. If the population doubled or tripled, the per capita wealth advantage would erode. The government understands this and actively limits growth. Third, military power still determines who controls valuable resources. The Falklands War in 1982 wasn't about nostalgia or imperial pride. It was about maintaining control over an economic asset. At the time, the full value of the fishing zone hadn't been realized yet. But Britain understood the strategic importance. Argentina understood it too, which is why they invaded. The war's outcome was decided by military force. Britain won, so Britain controls the resource. Argentina lost, so Argentina gets nothing. All the legal arguments about historical claims don't matter. What matters is who controls the territory and has the military capacity to defend it. The Falklands generate over 96,000 euros per capita in GDP because Britain won the war. If Argentina had won, that wealth would flow to Buenos Aires instead. Here's the warning. The Falklands model isn't replicable. You can't just declare an economic zone and become rich. You need the resource, the legal framework, the institutions, and the military capacity to defend your claim. Most places don't have all 4. The Falklands do, but their prosperity is fragile. It depends on continued demand for seafood, continued political stability, and continued British military protection. If fish stocks collapse due to overfishing or climate change, the economy collapses. If Britain decides the cost of defending the islands isn't worth it, Argentina might try again. If global geopolitics shift and fishing nations refuse to pay for licenses, revenue disappears. There's also the oil. 60 billion barrels sitting offshore, undeveloped because extraction is expensive and politically risky. If technology improves or oil prices spike, that calculation could change. Suddenly, the Falklands would become far more valuable and far more contested. The delicate balance that's kept the peace since 1982 could shatter. And there's climate change. The Southern Ocean is warming. Fish populations are shifting. The Falklands already closed the squid season early in recent years due to declining stocks. If the fish move south toward Antarctica, the economic foundation of the islands crumbles. Tourism might grow, but it will never replace fishing revenue. The broader lesson here is about the nature of wealth in remote, resource-dependent economies. The Falklands look like a success story, and in many ways, they are. But that success rests on factors beyond the control of the people who live there. They didn't create the fish. They didn't create the legal system. They didn't win the war. They inherited a fortunate set of circumstances and have managed them well. But circumstances can change. Resources deplete. Geopolitics shift. Empires decline. The Falklands are wealthy today because a combination of geography, history, law, and military power aligned in their favor. There's no guarantee that alignment will last. So what does the future hold? The Falklands seem like a place slightly outside our world. Isolated, harsh, beautiful, untouched by the chaos of markets, wars, and political madness that dominate the rest of the globe. People there fish, raise sheep, walk the streets of tiny settlements, and watch massive flocks of seabirds. It feels timeless. But nothing is timeless. Every economic model has an expiration date. The question isn't whether the Falklands model will eventually break. The question is when and what will trigger it. Will it be climate change reducing fish stocks? Will it be a shift in British politics that makes defending the islands politically untenable? Will it be Argentina finding a way to reclaim the islands through diplomacy or force? Or will it be something no one is currently imagining? The only certainty is that the delicate balance that has created this strange pocket of prosperity in the middle of the frozen South Atlantic won't last forever. The challenge for the Falklands is to use this moment of wealth to build resilience for whatever comes next. Because history shows that when the winds change, remote islands are the first places left behind. Thanks for watching till the end. If you're here, you're one of those who want to understand how the financial system really works. Subscribe, new research tomorrow. And drop a comment. What do you think about this? Your perspective matters.